Today, the focus is on education and development. We are now studying specific areas. These are very quick takes on those areas, but it's not just to look at those areas and the problems, but to also look at how certain basic foundational and fundamental principles affect what has happened and is happening in those areas. Today, education is the focus, and education is important because it is very often the perennial cure-all that people say. What's the problem? Doesn't matter. What's the solution? Education. Uh, but they don't ask themselves, education. Why education? How education? For what education? They just say education. Now, in fact, education per se has always been, but is particularly a major focus of development under what are called the Millennium Development Goals, which have as among their purposes free universal primary education and gender parity between males and females as specific goals. And as part of that, there has been an international initiative organized called Education for All, EFA, that is supposed to help various nation and groups and even NGOs, civil society, and government work together to help achieve these goals. Now, we're not going to discuss actually a lot of the problems that involve these goals. These are very laudable goals. They're necessary goals for a prosperous and peaceful world. They're not as easy as people think. For instance, there are goals that by 2015, all children are supposed to be receiving universal primary education. Without have to be that every kid is in school today and that they're not flunking out or repeating grades, and that just isn't the case. So the goal itself is more of a motivation than a realistic objective. But still, it's a noble objective, except it's a bit simplistic as an objective. It emphasizes access, and it emphasizes access for everybody and in a sustainable fashion, which means free, not fee, because educational and school fees have been one of the impediments for poor children getting access to classrooms. However, as we noticed in our previous discussion of agriculture, there are certain foundational principles of good development, and the ones I identify are that good development represents systematic cooperation in a sustainable and equitable fashion. When we discussed agriculture, we noticed that one of the problems was agriculture has had great successes in terms of systematic cooperation, getting agricultural production going, but it's not been too good in terms of sustainability and equity of results. Education, one could say, is exactly the opposite. The educational goals are definitely goals for equity, universal education, and the sustainability in terms of having guaranteed funding for all children is a necessary element. But what's amazing is how there has not been true systematic cooperation in education. In fact, that may be one of the reasons why we haven't succeeded, even though there are initiatives that call for it. Now, why is it, and what do I mean about it? Well, the fact is that there have been fabulous and repeated successes in education that have existed well before the international development paradigm itself came into being. And in international development, there are movements, the BRAC school movement, which started in Bangladesh, but is a movement that has delivered education to large numbers of poor children. There's an organization called Pratham in India that basically can teach kids how to read in a fraction of the time of the normal school system. And there's one particular movement that I like to highlight called Escuela Nueva, the new school movement that started in Colombia and is now spreading, which has demonstrated that it can deliver superior education to rural children in a replicable and sustainable fashion by systematically combining what are actually the four key elements of a good education system, which is good teachers, good curriculum, good materials, and good evaluation. And the secret is that you not only have to have those four elements, they have to reinforce each other. So what good is a curriculum if the materials are different from what the curriculum, or what is it good is it if you're testing kids for not something other than what you're teaching them. But the Escuela Nueva is a multi-classroom system that took the idea of let's not build schools, but let's take these four elements, put them together in a transparent fashion that could be understood by students, teachers, supporters, and let us actually help schools that want to use them. We will help them train their teachers, get to know the curriculum, we will get them the material, we will evaluate them, and it's been an enormously successful program and something anyone who's interested in education should look at. The problem is, why then just aren't we doing more of it or one of the other good models? The fact is that's not what's happening in a large part of the world. What's happening in a large part of the world is the push for just numbers in education actually in many ways is destroying the quality of those other elements, let alone their systematic collaboration. So, in fact, in much of the world, the status of teachers is going down, down, down. You have got universal education. It turns into 200 kids in a classroom and the need for a teacher. So you hire somebody who may themselves have only gone to 6th grade. That's not going to provide a good education. The curriculum. You don't particularly develop curriculums because they're needed. Too many of our curriculums are actually determined by politics. And it goes from curriculums that preach religious intolerance in certain countries to curriculums that preach anti-scientific creationism in Texas. Then there's the whole question of materials. Materials, in fact, should be not only good and relevant, they have to be affordable. But in fact, many materials aren't affordable. An outstanding example of this is there was a very successful aid program called the Jamaican Textbook Miracle, in which they produced very, very low-cost materials from the remnants of newspapers and got newspapers to actually print them. And they were very successful until they also were successful in training teachers and getting schools to be more formal. And then teachers wanted to use more standardized textbooks, and that required more expensive textbooks. And in fact, the result was that the availability of materials actually went down because the price of them went up. And it was an example of where you're not actually balancing in a systematic, cooperative fashion these four elements. Now, why is that? Well, the answer goes back to this amazing fact that education doesn't seem as a field to really, across the field, have the type of systematic cooperation that you get in agriculture. And just an immediate example is this very popular American film called Waiting for Superman that highlights how Finland is probably the best education system in industrial countries, but at the same time that film advocates all the things that the Finnish do not do. The Finnish are very flexible. They evaluate based upon individual goals. They support teachers. They emphasize physical education for youth. They don't like standardized testing. Yet, even though we know they're good, we don't follow them. And why is that? And the reasons I would say is education is uniquely handicapped by handcuffs. And the handcuffs have, on one side, politics and administrative exigencies, not educational exigencies. And on the other hand, they have academic and profit incentive exigencies. Academics who make their reputation by changing the way education is delivered rather than ensuring that past successes are expanded. Profit people who make their money by selling new ways, new tools, not by creating and reusing the cheapest tools. And that's really a great deal of the problem in education. If we want to, therefore, really achieve the Millennium Goals and really want to achieve education for all, we're going to have to do a better job of getting those foundational principles of systematic cooperation going. But we're also going to have to do one other thing. We're going to have to clarify education for what? Is it education for knowledge? Is it education for jobs? Is it education for morals, ethics, and values? Is it education to have a deeper understanding of the meaning of our lives?